Chapter 10. When Zoe had gone from Quilleran's apartment, leaving him with a can of coffee, a pound of sugar, a half pint of cream, a pack of cigarettes, and 2 pounds of chocolate chip cookies, he wondered how much information she had withheld. Her nervousness suggested she was sifting the facts. She had stammered when asked if anyone else had a key to the Lambeth Gallery. Admittedly, she had avoided telling the police everything that occurred to her, and she claimed to have forgotten the existence of a painting valuable enough, possibly, to make murder worthwhile. Quilleran went upstairs to prepare Coco's dinner. Slowly and absently, he diced meat while pondering other complications in the Lambeth case. How valid was Sandy's hint that this was a family affair? And how would that connect with the disappearance of the Garotto? There was also the vandalism to take into account, and Quilleran reflected that the missing painting fell in the same category as the damaged subjects. It depicted the female figure in skimpy attire. He opened the kitchen door and looked out. The night was crisp, and the neighborhood smells were made more pungent by the cold. Carbon monoxide hung in the air, and oily rags had been burned at the corner garage. Down below him was the patio, a dark hole, its high brick walls cutting off any light from distant street lamps. Quilleran turned on the exterior light, which cast a weak yellow glow on the fire escape, and thought, what does that guy have against using a little extra electricity? He remembered seeing a flashlight in the broom closet, and he went to get it. An efficient, long-handled, well-balanced, powerful, chrome-plated beauty. Everything Mount Clemens owned was well-designed. Knives, pots and pans, even the flashlight. It threw a strong beam on the walls and floor of the empty patio, on the ponderous wooden gate, on the wooden fire escape. Patches of frozen slush clung to the steps, and Quilleran decided to postpone further investigation until daylight. Tomorrow he might even take Coco down there for a romp. That evening, he went to dinner at a nearby Italian restaurant, and the brown-eyed waitress reminded him of Zoe. He went home and played Sparrow with Coco, and the cat's movements reminded him of the missing ballet dancer. He lighted the gas logs in the fireplace and scanned the second-hand book on economics that he had bought at the press club. The statistics reminded him of 9024683. Or was it 5? On Sunday, he went to visit Nino. The artist's studio home in an alley garage was as dismal as it sounded. A former occupant had left the building coated with grease, to which was added the blight of Nino's collection of junk. Having knocked and received no answer, Quilleran walked into the agglomeration of joyless cast-offs. There were old tires, bushels of broken glass, chunks of uprooted concrete sidewalk, tin cans of every size, and dispossessed doors and windows. He made note of a baby carriage without wheels, a store window mannequin with arms and head missing, a kitchen sink painted bright orange inside and out, an iron gate covered with rust, and a wooden bedstead in the depressing modernistic design of the 1930s. A heater suspended from the ceiling belched warm fumes in Quilleran's face, while the cold drafts at ankle level were paralyzing. Also suspended from the ceiling by a rope was a crystal chandelier of incredible beauty. Then Quilleran saw the artist at work. On a platform at the rear stood a monstrous thing made of wooden oddments, ostrich plumes, and bits of shiny tin. Nino was affixing 2 baby carriage wheels to the monster's head. He gave the wheels a twirl and stood back, and the spinning spokes, glinting under a spotlight, became malevolent eyes. "Good afternoon," said Quilleran. "I'm a friend of Zoe Lambeth. You must be Nino." The sculptor appeared to be in a trance, his face illumined with the thrill of creation. His shirt and trousers were stiff with paint and grease, his beard needed trimming, and his hair had not recently known a comb. In spite of it all, he was a good-looking brute. with classic features and an enviable physique. He looked at Quillerin without seeing him. Then, admiringly, he turned back to the thing with spinning eyes. "Have you given it a title?" asked the newsman. 36, said Nino, and he put his face in his hands and cried. Quillerin waited sympathetically until the artist had recovered, and then said, "How do you create these works of art? What is your procedure?" "I live them," said Nino. 36 is what I am, I was, and I will be. Yesterday is gone, and who cares? If I set fire to this studio, I live. And every leaping flame, flash, flare, floriferous flourish. Do you have your materials insured? If I do, I do. If I don't, I don't. It's all relative. Man loves, hates, cries, plays. But what can an artist do? Boom! That's the way it goes. A world beyond a world, beyond a world, beyond a world. A cosmic concept, Quillerin agreed. But do people really understand your ideas? They wear out their brains trying. But I know, and you know, and we all know. What do we know? Nothing. Nino was edging closer to the newsman in his enthusiasm for this conversation, and Quillerin backed away discreetly. He said, "Nino, you appear to be a pessimist, but doesn't your success at the Lambeth Gallery help to give you an affirmative attitude toward life?" Warm, wanton, wary, weak woman. I talk to her, she talks to me. We communicate. Did you know her husband is dead? Murdered. We are all dead, said Nino. Dead as doorknobs. Doorknobs, he shouted, and plunged into a mountain of junk in desperate search. Thank you for letting me see your studio, said Quillerin, and he started toward the door. As he passed a littered shelf, a gleam of gold signaled to him, and he called back over his shoulder, Here's a doorknob if that's what you're hunting for. There were 2 doorknobs on the shelf, and they looked like pure gold. With them were other pieces of bright metal, as well as some startling pieces of carved ivory and jade. But Quillerin did not stop to examine them. The fumes from the heater had made his head throb, and he was making a dash for the fresh air. He wanted to go home and spend a sane, sensible, sanitary Sunday with Coco. He was becoming attached to that cat, he told himself, and he would be sorry when Mount Clemens returned. He wondered if Coco really liked the cultural climate upstairs. Were the pleasures of reading headlines and sniffing old masters preferable to an exhilarating game of Sparrow? After 4 days of play, the score was 471 for the cat, 409 for the man. When Quillerin arrived home, anticipating a friendly, furry, frolicsome fuss at the door, he was disappointed. Coco was not waiting for him. He went upstairs to Mount Clemens' apartment and found the door closed. He heard music within. He knocked. There was a delay before Mount Clemens, wearing a dressing gown, answered the knock. I see you're home, said Quillerin. Just wanted to be sure the cat was getting his supper. He has finished the entree, said Mount Clemens, and is now relishing a poached egg yolk as a savory. Thank you for taking care of him. He looks well and happy. We had some good times together, said Quillerin. We played games. Indeed. I have often wished you would learn mahjong. Did you hear the bad news about the Lambeth Gallery? If they had a fire, they deserve it, said the critic. That loft building is a tinderbox. Not a fire. A murder. Indeed? Earl Lambeth, said Quillerin. His wife found him dead in his office last Wednesday night. He had been stabbed. How untidy. Mount Clemens' voice sounded bored or tired, and he stepped back as if preparing to close the door. The police have no suspects, Quillerin went on. Do you have any theories? Curtly, Mount Clemens said, I am in the process of unpacking, and I am about to bathe. There is nothing further from my mind than the identity of Earl Lambeth's murderer." His tone terminated the conversation. Quillerin accepted the dismissal and went downstairs, pulling at his mustache and reflecting that Mount Clemens had a talent for being obnoxious when it suited his whim. Down the street at a third-rate restaurant, he later scowled at a plate of meatballs, picked at a limp salad, and contemplated a cup of hot water in which floated a tea bag. Added to his irritation with his landlord was a nagging disappointment. Coco had not come to the door to greet him. He returned home unsatisfied and disgruntled. Quillerin was about to unlock the vestibule door when a scent of lime peel came through the keyhole, and he was not surprised to find Mount Clemens in the entrance hall. "Oh, there you are," said the critic amiably. "I had just come downstairs to invite you for a cup of lapsang souchong and some dessert. Rather laboriously, I transported home a Dobos torte from a very fine Viennese bakery in New York." The sun broke through Quillerin's clouds, and he followed the velvet jacket and Italian pumps upstairs. Mount Clemens poured tea and described current exhibitions in New York, while Quillerin let rich, buttery chocolate melt slowly on his tongue. "And now let us hear the gruesome details," said the critic. "I assume they are gruesome. I heard nothing about the murder in New York, where art dealers are more or less expendable. Forgive me if I sit at my desk and open mail while you talk." Mount Clemens faced a stack of large and small envelopes and wrappered publications. Placing each envelope face down on the desk, he rested his right hand on it, while his left hand wielded the paper knife and extracted the contents, most of which he dropped contemptuously in the wastebasket. Quillerin recounted the details of Lambeth's murder briefly, as it had appeared in the newspaper. "That's the story," he said. "Any guesses as to motive?" "Personally," said Mount Clemens, "I have never been able to appreciate murder for revenge. I find murder for personal gain infinitely more appealing. But what anyone could possibly gain by dispatching Earl Lambeth to the hereafter is beyond my comprehension." "He had quite a few enemies, I understand." "All art dealers and all art critics have enemies." Mount Clemens gave an envelope a particularly vicious rip. "The first one who comes to mind in this case is that indescribable Bolton woman." "What did the lady welder have against Lambeth?" "He robbed her of a $50,000 commission, or so she says." "The outdoor sculpture for the shopping center?" "Actually, Lambeth did the innocent public a favor by convincing the architects to commission another sculptor. Welded metal is a fad. If we are fortunate, it will soon die, put to death by practitioners like the Bolton creature." Quillerin said, "Someone suggested I write a human interest story about her." "By all means, interview the woman," said Mount Clemens, "if only for your own education. Wear tennis shoes. If she stages one of her insane tantrums, you may have to sprint for your life or dodge metal ingots." "She sounds like a good murder suspect." "She has the motive and the temperament, but she did not commit the crime, I can assure you. She would be incapable of doing anything successfully, especially murder, which requires a certain amount of finesse." Quillerin lingered over the last few bittersweet crumbs of torte, and then he said, "I've also been wondering about the junk sculptor they call Nino. Know anything about him?" "Brilliant, odoriferous, and harmless," said Mount Clemens. "Next suspect?" "Someone has suggested it was a family affair." "Mrs. Lambeth has too much taste to indulge in anything as vulgar as a stabbing. A shooting, perhaps, but not a stabbing. is shooting with a dainty little cloisonné pistol, or whatever women carry in those cavernous handbags. I have always had the impression those handbags were stuffed with wet diapers. But surely there would be room to accommodate a dainty little pistol in cloisonné, or tortoise-shell inlaid with German silver. Quillerin said, "Have you ever seen the portrait she painted of her husband? It's as lifelike as a photograph and not very complimentary." "I thank the fates I have been spared that experience. No, Mr. Quillerin, I am afraid your murderer was no artist. The textural experience of plunging a cutting tool into flesh would be extremely repugnant to a painter. A sculptor would have a greater feeling for anatomy, but he would vent his hostilities in a manner more acceptable to society by mauling clay, chiseling stone, or torturing metal. So you might better search for an irate customer, a desperate competitor, a psychotic art lover, or a rejected mistress." "All of the vandalized art depicted the female figure," said Quillerin. "Rip," went the letter knife. "A nice sense of discipline," said the critic. "I begin to suspect a jealous mistress." "Did you ever have reason to suspect Earl Lambeth of unethical business dealings?" "My dear man," said Mount Clemens, "any good art dealer has the qualifications to make an outstanding jewel thief. Earl Lambeth chose to divert his talents into more orthodox channels. But beyond that, I am not in a position to say. You newspaper men are all alike. Once you get your teeth into a piece of news, you must worry it to death. Another cup of tea?" The critic poured from the silver teapot, and then returned to the attack on his mail. "Here is an invitation that might interest you," he said. "Have you ever been unfortunate enough to attend a happening?" He tossed a magenta-colored announcement card to Quillerin. "No. What's a happening?" "An evening of utter boredom, perpetuated by artists and inflicted on a public that is gullible enough to pay admission. However, the invitation will admit you without charge, and you might find it a subject for a column. You might even be mildly amused. I advise you to wear old clothes." The happening had a name. It was called Heavy, Heavy Hangs Over Your Head, and it was scheduled for the following evening at the Penniman School of Fine Art. Quillerin said he would attend. Before the newsman left Mount Clemens's apartment, Coco graced the occasion with a moment of his time. The cat appeared from behind the oriental screen, looked at Quillerin with a casual glance, yawned widely, and left the room.